And then I'm going to go and highlight myself here, I think, or spotlight. So you can see what's going here. Now, there we go. So this is a bucktail, one of many that I've tied for fishing for salmon up at Hanina. Here's the smaller version, which you would probably fish around here too. This in between these size ranges, there'll be a couple of different ones that I've got. I've tied this one in purple and pink and white, but I also tie a whole whack of them in chartreuse over white with some red highlights and stuff like that, and rig them up with some spinners for fishing as a trolled bucktail behind the boat. So what goes into this? Oh, and so I'm going to show you this one in the large size so you can see how it's constructed. It's pretty straightforward. And then a little later, I'm going to show you this part, which is if you want to do a tandem hook rig, I've tied one of these on a small hook, and I'll show you, it's an interesting way of attaching material to the hook that I'll show you for bucktails.
Dave, will you mention the distance, the length of the tandem rig? I mean, what is the overall length between the front and back?
Well, it depends on how you're going to fish it. What I'd probably do when I fish this is I'd probably cut this hook off. And so you're basically fishing it as a single fly. But you can extend it, and I'll talk about that when I get to do the second fly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so hook. This one is a Tiemco O'Shaughnessy, and that's a fairly long shanked hook. This is a size 4, but I've also used size 6s as well. I'm just doing the size 4 because that's the long bucktail fibers that I have. And one of the problems with these O'Shaughnessy's, it's a little bit brittle hooks, so you have to be careful debarbing them. Sometimes they'll break on you when you debarb them. So always debarb them before you put them in the vise. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that's the one I want. So before, yeah, that's stuff. Let's do the 6. Let's go down here and get the 6. A little shorter shank, so it doesn't take so long to. And actually 6 for a 10 to 13 pound coho, 6 weight hook works pretty good. I think the bigger hook, sometimes the fish get a little more leverage on it. Oh yeah. Nice thing about this Dyna King vise is it's got some grooves in the jaws that allow it to grab the bend, so you don't have to use as much pressure to hold the hook. Okay, so first I'm going to start with white thread, and that's because the body of this fly is a fairly light color. So I'm going to start with white thread. I'm going to start well back from the eye. And my vise is wiggling around here. It's wiggling. I had to move. I was tying in the living room yesterday, so I had to move my vise out here, and I didn't get a chance to set it up right. Okay. So I'm just going to cover the shank back here, all the way back to where the barb was. And at that point, I'm going to tie in the ribbing, which is number 12 Mylar tinsel. You can see, hope you can see that. And because it's two-sided, it's got gold on one side and silver on the other. I'm going to tie this sucker in so that the gold faces out. because what will happen is the first wrap will turn the tinsel over. I should get some more light on here so you guys can maybe see a little better. I'm just going to tie it right at the back. And I start it sort of leaning on my side of the hook so that when I wrap back over it, it now ends up on the top of the hook. So that's my tinsel tied in. To get my glasses here. I'm a little closer to the thing than I was. There we go. That's better. I got this, the body is an acetate floss that I've had for a long time, but it's UV reflective. So it makes the fly kind of glow quite nicely when you put UV on it. Yeah, there we go. These old spools didn't have a nice slot in them, so they're a little trickier to deal with. Cut that off. And I'm going to lay it down just on the hook and do a loose wrap and then slide it back so it's just a little bit on the shank. And once I get that done, I'm going to wrap my thread all the way up to, and again, I'm going to leave a good 3 eye widths behind the eye of the hook. Now, as I wrap this floss, this acetate floss has a tendency to, as you can see, to spread out. So I need to make a counterclockwise turn every wrap to keep it from getting too flat. Don't catch the hook point. So at least one counterclockwise turn, because every turn over the hook puts a clockwise twist in it. And to take that clockwise twist out and keep the floss from getting too flat, you want it a little flat because you want it to overlap a little bit. But you have to sort of, every time you go around, you need at least one and sometimes 2 twists to keep that floss flat. You can see it does sort of spread out a bit as I go forward. That's this multi-strand floss does that. It's not like the 3 or 4 strand stuff. So it takes a little practice every once in a while, like I say, a counterclockwise turn. Now you wouldn't have to do that if you were using the rotary feature of this vise, but I can't set that up here with the bobbin holder the way it's going to be in the way. So I get a nice fairly flat body all the way up to where I've got the thread hanging. I'm going to tie that off. A couple of wraps in behind, a couple in front. Trim it. Then I'm going to take my hackle pliers and grab this tinsel. And I'm going to make a wrap around the back. And what that should do is turn the gold side in. And at this point, I'm going to use a consistent angle between the, not a right angle, but like a 60-degree angle between the tinsel and the hook. And that way, if I keep that consistent, I get a nice even set of tinsel ribs that go up the body of the fly. And 4 or 5 turns is good. And do 2 or 3 wraps in behind and a couple of wraps in front to lock the material in and trim it off. And there's little tag sticks up there, so I just poke that down with my fingernail and wrap over it to make sure it's not going to come undone. Now at this point, I take my whip finisher and I tie off the white thread. Right. And I get my 6/0 black thread, and I'll start that just in behind the eye and just wrap it down the shank to where the white thread is. And the reason I do this is because the fly is going to have a black head, and the white don't want the black showing through underneath that that floss because it's somewhat transparent. And why I'm going to show you that. Turn my light off here. You can see how shiny that, this is UV, how shiny that tinsel is. It really has quite a glow to it when you hit it with UV light. So I don't want to take that away by using black underneath it. Now here, I'm going to use 3 colors of hair. I've tied this with bucktails, with polar bear, and polar bear is just isn't crushable enough to make it a really good fly. So I'm going to do it with bucktails. I have one of these small pieces of white. I also have a full bucktail of white. And I'm probably going to use that because it's a little shorter hair. And then the middle one, I've got, again, these pink. And then I've got sort of a blue or purple. So we're going to take the back part and find some bucktail back here. And I'll take off a reasonable chunk, sort of probably gap width of the hook chunk of white bucktail. I'm going to cut it off right down at the leather part. Get my my bin underneath here. I'm going to hold it by the tip, and I've got a little comb here. I'm going to comb the fuzz out of the bottom. And when you do that, it tends to thin down the strip, so you end up with about, I'd say, 2/3 of what you started with by the time you take the loose bits out of the bottom. And then I want to stack it. So I have for this you need a big hair stacker. So I'm going to put the tips in, and sometimes I take the top out of the stacker and blow down it to force the tips into the stacker, and then set it all down in there. And then when I do that, reasonably stacked. And again, it's down to about a little less than half of the gap width because I've taken all the shorties out. I measure from the eye of the hook to the bend, and I want that amount of from where the thread is hanging to the back of the hook. I want that much at least out the back behind the bend, because I'm going to make this a fairly long fly. So you see it's probably, by the time I'm done, about not quite twice the shank length of the hook where I'm going to tie it in. And I measure where it is with my right hand, I should say, grab it with my left hand. And then I take my scissors, wherever the hell they went. Where'd they go? There. And I'm going to cut it probably about 3/8 of an inch out in front, maybe a little more, almost a half an inch out in front, just to get rid of some of the excess. put it in my left hand and lay it down where the thread is, and you'll see it extends past the eye. And I go over top and I make a couple of light wraps and cinch down reasonably strongly. And what I want to do is just, I've done 2 wraps, and what I want to do is just scrunch this around a little bit so that some of those fibers go below the hook shank. So you see some of the fibers have come down below the hook shank to sort of shroud the hook. Now the pink, and I'm not going to take a great big whacking. This is just sort of an intermediate highlight color. And if I scrunch it down, it's maybe half of a gap. Cut it off right down at the leather. I want good length here. Do the same thing with the comb. Hold them by the tips. Get the fuzz out. Right down by the tip. The loose stuff out. Getting back into the hair stacker. That's this one. These aren't quite so fuzzy, so I should be able to get them right in there. Put them in there, and then and you get the fuzzies in it. When I pull out the hair stacker, for those of you that don't use hair much, always hold it at a bit of an angle, so when I take it apart, it doesn't fall right out. See that? Now I can take out from the butt end and measure it up against the existing hair. And I want the tail of this to almost be a straight line straight up at the back. And I'm going to measure it with, I'm going to tie it in with the left hand, do the same thing, leave about a ½ inch sticking out in front. Lay it down right over top of where I tied the other one in. And this one I want to pinch hard so that the deer hair kind of goes oval and it's tight. It's not going to wrap around the hook this time. I want to make sure that this is pinched solid and it's right on top. Otherwise it's going to tend to wrap around the hook a bit. About 3 wraps. And then I'm going to pull the pink hair up a bit. Make sure it's on there good and solid. Give another good wrap. And it will flare up. Now the blue. And this stuff is a little shorter, so I'm going to try and find the longest ones on this patch that are available. And again, trim him right down at the butt. Again, the usual. I'm going to take that fuzz out. There was a lot of fuzz in that guy. There's quite a difference in quality of bucktail, and some of it's quite spiky and some of it's not. Get that in the stacker. And measure that again, same routine, right to where I want it at the back, even up. Trim a bit of this off, just so it's manageable. Set it down right where I had that stuff before and wrap it good. Again, pinch hard so that it stays on top and in sort of an oval shape. Now you see, I've got all of that stuff wrapped down pretty good. And it's fanned out. Now, this is the tricky part. I'm going to take all of this stuff here, pull it up, and lay my scissors on the eye at about a 45-degree angle and cut it. Give it a haircut at the front. Tended to collapse all that stuff, which I didn't really want to do. Okay, now I've got it in place. Now I'm just going to wrap down all those butts right down to the front of the hook. Clean up as much of the loose ends of this stuff as I can and fold them back so the eye of the hook is clear. And then I'm just going to use thread like crazy here to make a head on this fly. Didn't get as much blue as I wanted. There we go. Now just use lots of black thread here to make a large black head, getting down all of the bucktail bits. That stick out, all the little trimmed parts. Now, if you want a nice shiny head on this guy, you'll probably find that you have to, there we go.
If you
You
use
have to-
black shiny head cement,
Yeah, that would be the answer. Use black shiny head cement.
that's what I used to use. I got a couple here that it,
And I use the thread just to give lots of thread to give that head a good solid shape. And then whip finish.
you can also put a bunch of lacquer on it.
Yep.
And glue an eye on it.
Yeah, that's, I don't bother with the eyes because then you either have to use UV or epoxy to make the eyes stay. I find if you just lacquer them on, they come off. So that's him. And just make sure that that stuff is standing up a bit. Now, one of the ways you can make this stuff stay together is if you want to be a little bit picky, you can use a little dab of super glue just before you put down your bucktail to tie it down. And that will tend to make it a little more solid. So I'm just going to put that aside. So that's a relatively short shank hook that I should have probably used the number 4. So that's the basic bucktail. That's the basic process. Now I'm going to show you another way of tying hair on a fly, which I discovered when I was looking up bucktails on the web. And I'm using this as a short hook. This is for a stinger, and it's going to go right behind a shorter shanked fly. And so this is what's fire hole. It's a size 6 streamer, 3XL extra heavy wire, but it's actually a fairly short hook shank compared to those O'Shaughnessy's. And for this one, I am going to use the good solid 3/0 back black thread. I'm not going to do anything to the body of this fly. I'm not going to put anything underneath it because the whole body of the fly is going to be hair, bucktail. So I come back to where the barb would have been if this particular hook had a barb. And once again, we're going to start with the bucktail. I'm going to try and find a little shorter stuff here because this is going to be a relatively short fly. I'm not going to take a whole whack and keep small amounts this time around, smaller than the last time. And this is the tedious part, is cleaning out the bucktail, getting it down to the size that you want. That's might be a little much. There we go. Okay, now with this guy, I'm gonna do a quick stacking. And these long bucktails, they really long hair. They have an issue with getting them in the tube. Sometimes I have to insert them from the bottom, because the tips are so ragged, they stick out the wrong way. I'll put it in the bottom first, and then pull them out so that I can get the bottom of the stacker in there. That particular bucktail is really long. Now this time I'm going to measure a couple of really kickers there. I'm going to measure basically shank length, and I don't want it hanging out too far the back. And I'm going to measure it there with my left hand. And this one I'm going to cut short in front of my fingers, like I would for a clouser. I only want a little bit sticking out. And I'm going to lay it down on the hook shank and tie it in, and tie those butt ends right down. And that's on top of the shank. That gives you a little bit of hair sticking out. And then I'm going to get another piece of white, about the same size. Trim it off. And I'm just not going to bother stacking it. I'm just going to pull the really long ones off. I'll measure approximately the same length. And I'm going to go cut that short again. Now here's the interesting part. I'm going to turn it around. And I'm going to tie it in with these severed butts facing the black. Bring my thread forward to just in front of where I tied that other bucktail off. I'm going to set it down there, and I'm going to tie it in right there on top of the hook shank as best I can. Now you'll note that it will go around the hook shank a bit. When I get 2 or 3 wraps, I'm going to come in here with my scissors and trim these, lift them up, hold the other hair down, lift up the butts, and trim them off short. Now, rather than going back and binding them around, I'm going to find my little tool here, which is a piece of copper tubing. And I'm going to mess around with this. I'm going to put the copper tubing over the eye of the hook and push that hair back, all the way back, so it's facing backwards now. And then I'm going to wrap over top of that bent over hair. So on top of the hook, keep it bent over, wrap in front of it, and keep going back until you get that bulge of hair wrapped down with good solid wraps of thread. Bring my thread forward about 1/4 inch again, a little less than 1/4 inch. Now you see how that hair flares out? This is what I think this technique works really good. It makes that hair flare out around the hook really nicely. Pink hair. We'll do the same thing with this. Not a huge batch of pink here.
Did you ever use crystal flash in it, Dave?
I do in a lot of them I do, but with these multicolored ones, I don't know that the crystal flash helps a whole lot. But the ones that I've been tying with the UV, I don't think it helps much. But yeah, I would normally tie a lot of crystal flash in the regular bucktails, particularly the chartreuse ones. So there's my pink. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the last one. I'm going to cut it off. And put it on backwards. Bring it forward. Stick this down there and wrap it on. Wrap back over the butt ends a little bit. Make sure it's surrounding the shank of the hook. Bring my thread forward and use my tool here to push all that hair back. This is the same little brass tubing tool I used when I cut foam eyes for boobies by serrating the other end, putting it in my drill press and drilling them out of a white foam cork. Get that on there. So now I've got that hair kind of wrapped around everything in color. And blue. Where'd my blue go? I need to find my blue. Blue hair has disappeared on me. I'll stick another piece of white in because it looks like my shank is longer than I expected. So I'm going to find some short white. Anyway, I'm going to put an extra batch in here. It's just taking a little longer than I thought it would, but I haven't gotten used to doing these demo tines from my bench here, and I don't know where I'm putting my tools all the time. So, all right, once again, measure. This is going to be a white one. I see where the blue went. It went in my trim bin. Once again, I reversed it, lay it down around the hook shank, and trim the butts off here a bit. Part of having the butts on here is that it builds up the bulk of the body a little bit. Push it back again. Hold them out of the way.
What diameter is that pipe, Dave?
I don't know. I've actually was looking for a smaller one. Where I get that copper tubing is at the hobby shop in Hillside Mall. They have a little square and round tubing in different materials, and that's where I got the copper tubing. I think
It
they
might
use
be the same size as a brake line.
Yeah, I don't have it. Maybe I can measure it for you. I'll measure it for you in a minute here. Let me finish this blue guy off.
A long time ago, I had seen it at a craft store as well, brass
Yeah.
tubing.
Yeah, brass tubing.
So Michael's
might-
may have.
You might find, yeah, you might actually find it at Michael's. And you could probably use a soda straw, right? A smaller soda straw. Anyway, the whole idea is to have something that's fairly firm that you can tie on your hair and then just push it back so that it's out of the way when you want to do the last few wraps. So this guy's going to be the last bit of hair I'm going to put on. I'm going to set her down there and spread it around the hook a bit. So this was I just thought this was an interesting technique for putting hair on. And it does give a neat shape to the fly. Oh, that didn't stay back. So let's get that there. Right. Oh, good and solid. Now, I'm not going to tie a big head on this guy, but I am going to build up a little bit so that I can get over that purple hair and make it sit towards the back. So it'll be a little, and I've left a bit of bare shank deliberately. So that's kind of the head of the trailing hook. Now, I won't do it for you, but I'll give you a rough idea what you do next. The whole idea behind this is that you want the second fly to be a measurable distance behind the first. And you want it to be articulated a little bit. Now, what some guys would do is they would take a piece of mono and run that, tie it on here on the hook. But what I saw these guys do is different. I'll do this real quick, like I'll get another hook just for fun. Give you an idea what, and then I'll cut this off later. These dang fire hole boxes are hard to get open. Another hook in the vise here. So this is how you attach the front to the back, and I won't tie the fly in the front because that'll take too long. I take some 15-pound Maxima, and if I can find the end of it, where is the end? It's in here somewhere. There it is. I'm going to take a length of that. And when I start tying the front fly, I'll do here. Just start the thread on the front, wrap it to the back. Bring the thread back up. I'm going to take my super glue, brushable super glue, and just do a little dab on the top. And take this mono and lay it down on top of the hook shank and wrap down to the bend of the hook.
Dave, this is the this would be the front fly.
This is where what you do on the front to attach the back one on.
Okay, thanks.
Now what I'm looking for here is, if I can find them, wherever the hell I went, is I've got some. Okay. I have some. Where'd they go? I have some beads. some clear beads. And I cannot find them. For the life of me oh, there we go. A little box of clear beads. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of them. I'm going to string it onto this mono. Get this on here. I got fumble fingers this morning. There we go. Through the hole. Come on, where's the hole? That's the problem with a clear bead, is finding the hole. Oh, give me a break. I hope I don't have this problem with the other way. There we go. Get in there. There's one. And I'm just going to do one. Then what you do is you take your trailing fly and you go from the bottom up through the eye of the fly. And then come back through your bead. Might have been easier to do it the other way, but anyway, we'll figure it out. There we go. Back through the bead, or beads if you use more than one. And make this loop the length that you think you need to get some separation between the two hooks. And then tie it down.
What's the size of the bead there, Dave?
It looks like an eighth.
Okay.
The whole purpose of the bead is to keep it from
Running ahead.
wrapping around and sliding ahead. So when you get that on there, and then you'd go ahead and tie your bucktail on the front. So I won't finish the fly, but that'll give you some idea of. So this is the same guy that showed me this technique for tying the fur on backwards. Did this to do his trailing hooks. So I thought that was kind of a neat technique to share with you guys, and there's be a little bit of shininess in that center part in between. And if you tied the front the way you would a normal bucktail with a nice shiny or UV material, it would work quite well.
Dave, have you got a finished one?
Yeah, I'll get that.
If you could just hold it up, that'd be great.
Yep, I'll do that.
Do you not glue the
Yes, I did.
mono?
I put a little bit of super glue on here before I wrapped the mono down, and it won't have set up by the time I got to tie the second one in. It'll be good.
Yeah.
And then I just tie the bucktail on the next. And quite often, like I say, with these bucktails, when I tie them on it in a conventional fashion, that after you get to the front, I would put a dab of super glue between the batches of bucktails so that it keeps. Sometimes you can pull the fibers out with the conventional, just tie it on straight. These ones, of course, because they've been doubled over, there's no way that hair is going to ever pull out.
Yeah.
So what the completed
Dave, what would you
bucktail-
say the overall length, ideal length? Of
Well,
this
you can
fly
adjust,
is?
you can adjust that, right? That's the beauty of the mono and the beads, is you can adjust that overall length to the length that you want. So that's what the assembled 2-hook fly looks like.
Now, which hook would you cut off, Dave?
I would normally cut the front one off. Yeah, the back, why you're putting a trailing hook on is if you get short strikes. Sometimes what coho will do, and this again is a coho fly for me. they will quite often, if there's a good school of herring, they'll go through the school and they'll go whack, 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 and stun the herring and then come back and grab it. So when you first get a hit, when you're doing this bucktail with a coho, you don't strike right away. Sometimes you even give it a little bit of a foot of slack, because then the fish will come back and whack. He'll pick the stunned coho herring up, and that almost always they'll get them on the trailing hook. So I found that if you have two hooks and they're close together like this, and if you're going to release the fish, it's really hard to get those out without them becoming bleeders. So normally I would tie these, if I'm doing trailing hook like this, I would cut the front hook off. Makes it easier to release a fall hook fish. There you go.
And for those who tie tube flies, I mean, that would be a great
Oh,
way you can do it without having even a hook at the front.
absolutely. Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Tube flies are another game.
yeah, exactly. Just as an aside, I know you were tying with bucktail, but I'd gone up to Teddy's up in Chemainus, and I picked up a bunch of stuff from them. They have polar bear in short, medium, and long available at 30% off. Most of the fly tying stuff is 50%. Actually, all the fly tying stuff is 50% off, but the polar bear is 30% off, and they have quite a selection still.
As a matter of fact, Brian did me a great favor. He stopped in. He's up there regularly. He stopped in and he brought me back a batch of nice polar bear.
Yeah, and Brian brought me back some hooks and stuff as well. So thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Some of the hair is actually quite long for some of these short flies, but for these longer bucktails, it's perfect.
Yeah,
Exactly. Good stuff. There we go. So it's Florence's turn now.
I thought it's Dave.
Oh, Dave. Well, yeah, we can have Dave do his blue thing. Do you want me to highlight you, Dave?
Sure.
I'll set you up on Spotlight here.
I like to give a little history lesson why I developed a particular fly or flies.
Okay, now what are you going by on your
iPad 133, I think.
There we go. Okay, iPad 133 Spotlight. There we go. Should be you.
2019, I wanted to try out the Campbell River, and Bill Thomas there was up there, and I called him and I said, Bill, what are you using for a fly? He says, anything blue. And I said, no, describe it. And he says, anything blue. And so I think I asked him 3 or 4 times, and anything blue. So I didn't know what to do. So what I did is I tied a blue woolly bugger essentially. And I can show you the first fly I tied looked like this, although it had a fluorescent yellow head. And then I found that the hackles would get torn apart. So I just made them without hackles. And that's basically the one without hackles. And for Florence's benefit, I'll show you what they look like. They run about average around 3 pounds, Floren, and you can see the flies right there in the mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally believe you. I'm not saying that blue flies don't catch fish.
Well, I just found that I've had absolutely great success. And sometimes the material you use, this is the Chanel. I prefer the smaller size, but I can't seem to find it. The really small size is this size. And to do a comparison, there's can't get this backwards. Don't know if you can really see that, but there's quite a difference in the size.
If
So-
There
you,
it is.
if you
Yeah,
hang
Dave,
it
the trick to showing these things is just hold them in front of your vise, like where the jaws are, and then we can see them best.
yeah, just hang it over the shaft. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So basically, there's the difference. It doesn't look that much there, but it is quite a substantial difference. Anyways, this is great stuff to use and it's very inexpensive, but when it comes down to August, you can't find any. So I started experimenting with different materials and I created a little board here. And all of these have different, well, most of these have different materials. This one here is just wire, and then I coated it with UV. And this one here is a French braid, and that's a French braid. That's the one I just talked about, these two. And this one here is another color sparkle braid. And this one, another color. This one's a wire. This one's a wire, and this one's like the other one. So I'll give you an example of some of the materials.
Oh yeah, the diamond braid
This is
stuff.
really inexpensive, okay? And I haven't used it, but I know it will work really well. This one here, last year I picked up. And to give you an idea, it's 4 times more expensive than the last one I showed you, but the quality of the fly. There's it really, and what makes a difference, I don't know if you can really see that, but it's really UV all the way through. Can you see that when it get the right light?
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm looking forward to trying that, but what I'm just basically telling you, you're unlimited in the materials you can use. And I usually use the chartreuse or the fluorescent green. And as I mentioned last week, and they're 5 30-seconds. You can pick these up at Trout Bomb for the green ones, and I picked the chartreuse up at Togans. Anyways, we'll get started because Florin
I
has
got
to get
both
going.
from Trout Bomb actually after you mentioned it last week. I placed a
Now,
mail
I'm gonna
order
tell
and
you
I
the
already got the
difference.
package in.
Yeah.
Dave, are those metal beads?
Well,
Yeah, they're
these are
tungsten.
these
Oh,
are
okay.
these are tungsten, and these are brass. Now, these tungstens are 5 30-seconds, and these brass ones are 3/16. In order to fit on the hook, the hole in the tungsten are much bigger than the ones in the brass for some reason. So you can go with a much smaller, well, one size down, if you're using tungsten. Now, Florin mentioned that these are Tolgan's number 6 hooks, stainless steel. I noticed they actually went up in price. I went to order some, and I think I'm going to buy 1,000. So when they go on sale, so if anybody's interested, let me know, and then we can sell you whatever you want at a discounted price that I get them at. But as you can see, that they got a barb on them. Now I'm going to show you how to get rid of the barb. Now let's show you. See the gap there? That's what I start with. That's my permanent gap. I just take the hook, rotate it, and I squeeze it a little bit and then rotate it back and forth. And there's the barb is gone. Oops. See the barb's gone?
Yep.
Hardly any effort at all. It took me a while to figure that out. If you're using a, okay, this bead just went right over that, no problem at all. But if you're using a brass 5 30-seconds, you're going to have to wrestle with it and bend the hook up. Actually, I did try to use some brass ones from Togans, and the fluorescent color was coming off. So I wrote back to them and they replaced them. But what I really found out was the hole is the gap is not sufficient enough in the brass ones. You have to move up. And moving up makes a bigger head. And probably about the next size up on brass would probably be about the same weight. Okay. Now to figure out, okay, this is just Flashabou for the tail. When you're cutting the Flashabou, usually you get your strands are all uneven like this. So what I tend to do is I hold it in my hand, I'll cut that, and then I'll reverse it. And as you can see, the even strands are ready to be tied in. And you still got some wonky ones, but don't worry about them though. You can cut those off. And I'll just put that aside and see if I can reuse it for the next one.
Yeah,
And next, I'm going to put my wire in. I keep forgetting where the hole is. Now, what happens is you can buy spools of wire that are like this, that will do the same thing. If you tie a lot of flies, you burn that up pretty quickly because there's not a lot on it. The craft store there right next to Robinson's have this, and it's 28 gauge that I'm using. I bought these pliers for crimping the hooks, but I found out the vise does a better job. And also, these cut really nice, the wire. So the next layer is the wire. I'll do the woolly bugger version because it's a little more complicated because it has this extra step of the hackle in. Now what I use for a hackle, when I was using a hackle, and the only reason I don't use them now is that I find, I don't know if you noticed, the teeth in those pinks wear out the hackle, but I find that the way Campbell River is, usually you catch about maybe 3, 4, and then you lose the hook anyways. Maybe you can get a half a dozen in. But what happens is there's so many rocks and sticks and other people have lost their gear, so you get hooked up on that. Now for your chenille, I just have to have on my, I always recommend you tie up a bunch of the similar flies so you can use less material. Because once you do it once, you say, okay, that's how much I used. I have on the bottom of my vise, you can't really see it. Anyways, it's in black, so it doesn't make a mess of the vise. Little marks that are basically 1 centimeter apart, and I can tell basically how long I did one. So if I do one that's got too much or too little, on next one I'll move it up. So it's very easy to regulate your material. I have yet to do Florin's device yet, but I plan to do it.
Yeah, for the sparkle chenille, the alternative to putting the elastic on, which might not work very well, is to actually spool the chenille on an empty thread bobbin and use one of those bobbin holders with a large diameter tube to feed the chenille. If you have one of those, they used to be available and fairly inexpensive. You don't need a fancy bobbin for this.
Dave, could you slide your vise to the left a tiny bit? Thank you.
How's the light? I can change the light. Is that better or worse?
No, the previous light was better.
Okay, so basically I put the chenille on. Sometimes I buff it up a little bit so that when I put on, if that was just part of the, I'm not using the feather to give it that other hackle look. I'd buff
So
that up
what of
after I
this,
put,
Winston, did you click on? Because I brought the meeting up, but I've made it without video.
as you can see, Florin, I might have tied this fly the odd time because I'm not wasting any material. The
Yeah.
importance of the wire is on those fish, they have little razor teeth. And if you don't use the wire, your fly will come apart really quickly.
Yeah, I was actually thinking an indestructible way to tie this fly is to make dubbing brushes with wire and some blue sparkly dubbing. And then you can, if you make the dubbing fibers long enough, then it would be as good as having, you can control basically the size.
Well,
And that
I'm going to
never
give you
comes apart.
a little lesson I learned is depending on the water conditions and how fresh the fish are, if it's really clear and the fish are I prefer this fly after trying both of these. A fly that has very little body and a nice bushy tail.
So Dave,
Again, it's interesting, you know, with the, don't really notice with the light, but ultraviolet light.
so Dave, were these some of the flies you were using last year as well on the Campbell?
Yeah, I only use these, and
Dave may not want to blow his own horn, but I'll blow it for him. I caught 8 and Dave caught 16, and we were there for 3 hours. I mean, just amazing fishing, and it just happened repeatedly.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that on text last year.
Yeah, just amazing.
um,
So when you see that in the fly boxes on the auction, don't vote for it. Don't bid for it. Okay.
Okay, we'll make sure not to.
Yeah.
I'll
I just
tie
wanted
you
to
some bail if I need to find some blue stuff for the body, and then I can tie you a few.
this is my daughter. I taught her the fly fish, and this is her first pink she catches.
Ooh.
And oops. So that's about a 3.5 pounder there, Florin.
Nice.
And interesting enough, twice on that river, we both, I was teaching her and I had my hands on the rod. She had her hands on the rod. And I was telling it, they hit very lightly and you don't want a bushy fly. If you notice the first fish, it had caught it right here in the mouth. And if you have a bushy fly, they tend to bump it and you never get the hit. And some people use heavy gear. You want to use as light as you can. But what I find too is there's another hazard. It's called fishermen. They will crowd you. So I found the perfect match up on the Campbell to be a 8-weight where you can control the fish somewhat and land it within an appropriate distance. If you got a 6-weight or a 4-weight, you have no control and it runs to the ocean. And meanwhile, you've gone by 30 people and you got them all tangled up and you never land your fish. With an 8, you can bring the fish in a decent amount of time.
So you think a
So-
7 is a little bit on the light side?
7, I'm not arguing about. 8 is what I find, and I used a traditional rod. But, so basically I have tied them with this wire. And that's, let me see one here. Oh, that's this one here. It's with this wire, and I just used some UV on it. And I have used this last year and caught plenty of fish with. It was interesting. Last year, I was there by myself, and there was a young Japanese girl with her father, and she came
Yes,
over
Bill, we
and
can see
started
it.
watching me. So I started instructing her, and she caught some fish, and the father came over. So she took a video. So after they were gone, I was fishing there by myself, and this guy came down with a younger guy, and he says, "What are you using?" And he grabbed my fly line and hauled in my fly to look at it. He says, "You're using the blue fly?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, I'm using the blue fly, but you've been catching a lot and I haven't been catching anything."
Well,
So-
you should have said, I'm the better fisherman.
Well, it's interesting because the guy was in barber, he was dressed from head to toe, probably a couple $1,000 worth of gear. He was being quite sarcastic. So I looked at the young guy and looked back at him, and I said, "Oh, would you like me to teach you?" And he stomped away. Yeah. Anyways, it's I can't tell you enough. Use a small fly and keep your line taut. Now, last year, I went with Ron Duncan, Ron Este, and I gave him one of these flies, and I showed him what to do, and he caught on really quickly, and he was catching them left, right, and center, and I don't think I had to show Ron anything. But yeah, it was funny. We walked down to this place, and there was a dozen people fishing, nobody catching any fish. And I think on the second cast, I caught one. On the third cast, Ron caught one. And we cast about 4 or 5 more casts. And I said, "Ron, there's no fish here. Let's leave." And then Bill was walking down the hill. We said, no, there's no fish there, Bill. And we went down below, and then we got into the fish.
We certainly did.
Yeah. So anyways, it's a fantastic fishery. But what I'm trying to tell you too is that if you can't find a particular material, don't be shy and try anything, because as I said, here's my lineup. And sometimes I change the color of the bead, and sometimes I change the color of the tail, but predominantly I prefer the blue. So that's my little history lesson for today.
Thanks,
Okay,
Dave. That was
thank
great.
you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Dave.
very much, Dave.
No
Informative.
problem.
And Dave, that
Okay.
wire you mentioned you got next door to Robinson's?
Yeah, you can pick that up anywhere. As you can see, it is artistic wire.
Okay.
And I think this one, it's 28 gauge and it's 40 yards for $14.50. If you bought one of these, they're $2.95, and they don't tell you how much is on there. But I assume it's a lot less, because look at the size of the spindle versus the diameter of this.
And it's blue.
And it's blue. And I also, once you take them out, I buy these little containers for $1 at the dollar store and keep your Chanel in that, so it isn't all over the place. Because they come on cards, like this, and once you take they become a nuisance. So I put them in these little containers. I think you get 4 or 6 for $1. That's it.
Thanks, Dave. That was excellent.
I
Yep.
think Christopher learned to catch them on that fly. Eh,
Yeah,
Christopher?
just like everybody else, I was a rank beginner, and Dave took me under his wing, and by the end of the day, I was catching them. And I was spade casting, not overhand casting. And I couldn't quite get the laser cast going, but I still caught fish.
These containers are still on sale at Lee Valley, stacks of 5,
Oh,
Yeah.
and they come in 3 sizes. Can you see it?
For all your beads, you're
Yeah.
too close, I think.
Yeah.
Comes in and out of you.
And I got, now there's the larger one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I find the best containers to use are those ones you get with takeout, where they put the sauce in them, those little plastic containers.
Hmm.
Yeah, the small little ones with the that are slightly tapered and have a plastic lid that snaps on.
Yep.
I was over in IKEA on Thursday and I picked this up. Oh, I can't see it.
Whatever it is. There's,
Okay, I don't know if we still have time here or not.
And we're
I
okay.
don't think anybody's running away from you, Lauren.
Okay, so container wise, at the craft store, I think I picked these up at Michael's. For storing small thing, like I find it with small hooks, it's quite challenging to find a good box, container, whatever. Same applies for small flies.
You can get those in a drugstore for pill
pills,
dispenser.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just that I think the drugstore charges more than the craft shop. For
And
the
those
same
are
thing.
larger.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what,
yours-
it's the same thing. It's the same pill box thing where you can open the compartments individually. Right, this little pin here is spring loaded, and then you just pop open the lid like that, and the rest stays closed, so you don't lose anything.
Lauren, you're
Anyway,
breaking
the
up.
storage thing. So here's my repair. Whenever I have something to do the last 3 days on Zoom, it seems like my internet is breaking up. So I'm just gonna forge on and hope I'm gonna talk this stupid internet into submission. So I got my my Regal vise repaired. I told you my story about the chipped jaws, and they came back, and they also replaced my handle with a much more comfortable ergonomic handle, which makes using these classic jaws a lot better. And with the Regal, you basically, if you want to change jaws, you have to buy a whole head, a whole vise head. But these are very nice. And the one thing I prefer about it, when I tie flies where I need to handle materials very carefully, I can put my hand resting on the vise head here, and it's extremely comfortable. That's the best, one of the best features of this vise. The other one is you don't have to fuss with adjusting the gap. Now, if you only tie saltwater size 6 hooks, that's not an issue. But if you go from tiny little nymphs to big saltwater hooks, you want to do some adjustments. You can't do the adjustments on these things. All you can do is change the vise heads. So you can do this, or you can do, I'm going to do some of those blue flies, I'm probably going to be using this head instead. This is these are their big jaws. Now I think they offer something even bigger, and they have some grooves here. You can probably see them that will hold your hook quite firmly. In fact, these big jaws, if you're not using super strong thread or some weird stuff, you can even tie small nymphs with these big jaws. They're quite versatile. If you want to tie small flies, this is a pretty good set of jaws. These are the stainless steel jaws. And they have finer pointed tips, and they're quite suitable for smaller. Device of the week. I'll see, I'm weak. So small flies, the plan today was to do this pink nymph here, this small nymph that you can see at one end of this piece of foam. And I'm going to put the hook in the vise and start tying. The tying itself is pretty quick. This is a simple pattern. So here's my, I'm going to maybe enlarge it a little bit. So this is one of those size 16 curve hooks. So I picked about 200 hooks from Teddy's tackle, and the bead is a 330 seconds, 2.4 millimeter brass bead. These ones came from Canadian Llama, and last week I put an order of various things from Trout Bum as well, and it already came. Very reasonable prices, very reasonable shipping. The shipping cost almost nothing. So, yep, I'm going to go back there. All right, so.
I only found that place by luck.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great tip. And
I was looking for those particular green heads, and I was doing a search, and they actually came up on Amazon.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing is the finding dumbbell eyes is not always easy. And this guy had a nice selection of eyes, and I want to tie a few of those upside down flies. So sorry, I got carried away there. So I attached a piece of fine wire. So this is fine silver wire for ribbing. And this is the material holder on the Regal, which is just this little spring sticking up. That unfortunately they gave up on their newest vices, but it's a super convenient. This was a brilliant idea to start with. And then the next ingredient is a shellback, and I'm just using a little piece of saltwater Flashabou, which is that slightly wider stuff. And when you go to hooks that are small enough, you may want to go to some narrower Flashabou and use 2 or 3 strands instead of just the one. Okay, so what I do to attach the Flashabou, I cut the end so it tapers to a fine point. That makes attaching a lot easier. The challenge with it is to actually see it, because if you turn it at a certain angle, this material becomes simply invisible. Whoops, what was I telling you? So try to hold it against the hook and attach it well with a thread. Okay. Now I've got my Flashabou attached there for the shell back. And I'm going to use some dubbing. I have some diamond dub in hot pink. And I'm doing the fancy version where I'm going to use 2 tones of 2 different dubbings of, you know, slightly different kinds of pink. And so just put the dubbing on the thread. Rabbit is very, very easy to work with, very soft. It dubs very well. We were talking, Bill, about dubbing wax. No need. Just twist it on the thread. I always use wax thread. I find it that's enough for my purposes. And if you have any fibers that are sticking out too wildly, you just trim them at the end. Okay, and then fold the shell back over. Secure with a couple of wraps of thread. And don't rush, move the thread in front of the Flashabou and just behind the bead. And then rib the fly. So take the wire and do a few even wraps. Bring it back right behind the bead. Secure with a couple of turns of thread. Then move the thread in front of the wire and helicopter the wire out of the way. Okay. Now at this point, you can also you can trim the Flashabou. And what I do is I just leave a little bit of a stub, like a little wing here, just a little bit, something to stick out. And then if I could see this, just take my scissors and I do one quick longitudinal cut. So it's actually, now it's like two little stubby bits. And then I take the sparkly dubbing and I just put a touch of dubbing here behind the bead because there's a little gap that usually needs filling. And if you fill that with thread, it doesn't look very nice. And I believe this sparkle just adds a little bit of magic touch to the fly. Okay, so all right, so get the dubbing in place. This also helps hide the thread very nicely. Using the pink thread also helps to sort of hide it inside the dubbing. So the reason is I don't have any exposed thread anymore on this fly, but that color shown through the dubbing, and so I prove that's nicely hidden. So if there are any super ugly stray threads, I'm going to deal with them right now. And if not, I declare the fly finished and I move on to the next one. And the hook here is officially a size 16, but if you compare this to a standard nymph hook, the size of a nymph is more like an 18. And it's easy to tie. It's a fly that works well for whitefish, I find. And it's just part of an arsenal of smaller flies that I like tying on these small hooks. So different colors, different things. I remember last week there was a talk about green chironomids, and I tried to see what some of these green chironomids might look like on these hooks. So here's, by the way, a new material I'm experimenting with that came from the sewing shop. I went there to get some repair parts for a sewing machine, and they had this stuff on 40% off for a spool of.
Is that a tinsel, Florent?
It's like a very fine mylar tinsel. You know, you buy these spools of mylar tinsel,
Yep.
and they cost like $5 a pop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got this whole thing. It's actually very fine. But what happens with it is if you take, just to show you an example, if you take this thing and you wrap it in multiple layers, you can get, I think, a reasonably nice body on a fly.
I was going to say that stuff would be great for chironomids and even for ribbing and stuff on flies.
Yeah, I don't know how strong it is for ribbing. I mean, I can break, you know, I have a piece here, you know, if it's, yeah, it's actually quite strong. So yeah, probably for ribbing as well. Worth trying. So I just got it yesterday. I'm just experimenting with it a little bit, and it also came. They also had some in blue, and I guess this could make a body on the blue fly for pinks.
Yeah,
it's the regular price. I don't know if I would want to pay it because it's quite expensive. It was like $350 with 40% off.
Oh wow!
But without the 40% off, this is more like $6 or $7. Yeah.
Yeah, if you double it or quadruple it, you could certainly use that to tie some of the blue flies quite nicely.
Yeah, if I did that, I would either use a wire to secure it with as ribbing, or I would use Sally Hansen's as an overcoat.
Yeah, that would make
And
sense.
I would tie the fly in batches. So I would do what's Dave's recommendation, 100 at a time, right? So do 100 bodies, coat them, let them sit, make sure you have the windows open if you do 100 flies, right? And then tie the fly.
Most of the patterns get them the UV coating on them.
You do that anyway. Okay. Yeah, so these are some of the other colors that I found, and I kind of went crazy on the blue because I thought, okay, if I'm gonna start tying those blue flies, I better get some blue material. So yeah, I
Well-
have about 1,000 yards of this stuff.
Lorraine, I think you're gonna have to go back and buy a whole bunch for everyone in the club here on the tying call.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, I might have to buy their whole stock. Would you give me a further discount?
So, so for you guys, Florin, can you see me now? Or you're still,
Yeah, we can see you. Mhm.
No, we can see you.
All right, so this is I finished up the fly that I was tying. So here's your trailing hook here, and there's the main fly. And then to finish the bucktail, I've got one of these little spinners out front here that's attached to it. Back so you can see. And then there's about 3 feet of mono, and I put one of these multiple ball swivels. So that's the basic bucktail. And then what I do is I hook the hooks on this and then wrap the line around it, and then use a stick pin to nail the swivel down. So I've got a whole raft of these on one of these little floating pool noodles. So that's how I rig my bucktails for when I go up north. And if you can get these nice little swivel spinner things, you can get them over.
I had a 4-bedroom, 5,300 square feet house.
Good.
Moved to a condo.
I think we're staring at somebody's ceiling here.
It's nice here. We have a problem with the
There you go.
squirrel.
Yeah.
Won't run away.
There you go. So I think we've done. I'll stop. It.
I'm also the president of the board, so we
There you go. What I want to do is